Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Kia ora e te iwi. Welcome in to the final Hoon of 2025. I'm Bernard Hickey, co-host with co-host Peter Bale in the same building but different rooms.
Well, only different. In fact, in the same flat. I was just thinking, what a nice lamp that is, Bernard. That
that you bought.
You've got a sort of mid-century modern look, which I favour in my house. But I do know exactly where you're speaking from, and I think we've both got matching gins and tonics today, haven't we?
Oh, and very nice. I'm very lucky to be slightly bit inebriated for the final show of the year.
Jesus Christ, we don't talk about that kind of thing, Bernard. That's a step too far.
If you're going to have a work party, this may
yes, this is our work party, exactly.
Yeah.
So, if I had a photocopier, you could put your bottom on it and photocopy it. Actually, I do have a photocopier, but it would be quite
do you have a
difficult
fax
for you
machine? Perhaps I could fax
I do. You could fax it to your boss and wherever they are overseas. And yep, we could do whatever. What else do people do? And I went to a journalistic thing recently, and it was like going to every sort of departure party you'd ever been to, which was always a bit sad.
Yeah. Well, it's
we're going to celebrate the end of the year, right? And the cascade into 2026. We've got a great show coming, we hope, with some interesting guests, a couple of whom are newbies in a sense. And Bernard, what are your highlights from the Hoon this year? Because I think actually when we next have dinner, we should work out how long we've been doing this, because I think it's more than 3 years. So what are the highlights? What are your couple of Hoon highlights this year?
Well, we've had some amazing guests, which you'll talk about in a minute. But for me, the highlight was a chat with Helen Robinson from the City Mission. And this year has been a year in which the rubber has hit the road in many ways for the government's policies. In particular, clearing homeless people out of motels has left a significant chunk of them living rough. And Rotorua has been the ground zero for our homelessness crisis, and as well as Auckland. And as we head towards the end of the year, Helen Robinson and many others working in city missions and homelessness organisations have been doing amazing work and fighting bloody hard to try to push back and try and achieve some positives out of this homelessness crisis we've got and the government's actions over the last year. And she's a very articulate, thoughtful, and passionate campaigner and someone who actually looks after people and makes sure that people have a roof over their heads, which in this day and age is incredibly important. So she's my hero of 2025.
Good. Well, that's really, because I should say, without being sort of in any way patting myself, just because I said to everybody after she went on that I would give them some money, which I did immediately after that, just because I have done it before, but they're so much at the forefront of these things. And she seemed like such a super practical person to be helping homeless people in Auckland with those needs. So, yeah.
Yeah, she's done an awful lot. And if anything, for me, 2026 is going to be the year of writing about, thinking about, reporting on homelessness and housing. I think it's the root of everything. And if we're going to have an election this year, I hope to goodness it's about housing and about how we solve some of our affordability and quality and quantity
and then
problems.
One of us ends up doing a bloody story this year on social housing in Kaingaora, and it wasn't you, which was which was a bit of a turn up for the books. So my two favourite Hoons, in a sense, although I think we had her on more than once, I talked about Hoon guests, although I love that. I was really taken with Chris Finlayson, and I wish there were more New Zealand politicians like him. Not that he's a politician now. And as so often, it's always fun having Helen Clark on. And now Helen she didn't apologise, but she couldn't make it tonight because she's grieving the loss of her father this week, a 106-year-old father who died in Waihi over the week, and had a funeral, I think, 2 days ago now. And so that's why Helen isn't with us, but she's in our thoughts. But I always find with her, she is a refreshing person. One day we will get her on the seabed and foreshore, but I always love having her on.
Yeah, I mean, she's not only thoughtful, but she's incredibly active. You always got to admire people who have the energy to stay in touch, involved, energetic, trying to make things happen. So many years after, not being in those positions of power, either in New Zealand or the United Nations, and never stopping, just the unrelenting energy of it is admirable.
Yes, and focus. So Bernard, we sometimes start the top of the show with a little bit of media. I've been kind of interested in TVNZ's 2 defamation cases playing out this week. And yes, to your sequin-clad assistant, I will be careful about this. Tallies, the fish people, lost yesterday their defamation case against TVNZ, which was a particularly ruthless one because it also went after the reporter, not just, it's traditional historically that you go after the publication, but not necessarily the reporter. So they lost partly because the judge, or mostly because the judge could not determine that there had been any, in fact, damage to Tallies from the financial damage, at least. There was no way for them to reckon on the potential damage, so they lost. And then at the moment, a rather odd evangelist and anti-COVID person, anti-vax person, Julian Batchelor, is suing TVNZ and the reporter and also Sanjana Hatatua, who we had on some time ago, over allegations of defamation and allegations that he might be racist. And one of the two odd aspects of this is he then said that, essentially, if I can paraphrase, I'm not racist, I just think that there is a fundamental flaw in Maori, and by the way, that they're not indigenous, and in fact this country was populated by a white red-haired population before Maori arrived, which tells you a lot about where the case is going. But the case is also funded, we discovered this week, by Jim Grennan, the alleged billionaire. I never really believe it when media says people are billionaires, certainly not about him or Jeffrey Epstein, not to mix them all up. But Jim Grennan has funded this case against TVNZ, and given his, I think, more than 10% shareholding in NZME, the publisher of the Herald, that seems
18.5%.
Yeah, that seems
and the engineer of a board clean-out.
Correct, and the funder of the Centrist, which is far from centrist and actually quite right-wing. And then today we had an absolutely fabulous story on this case. Peter Williams, who people will know as a rather lovely kind of Philip Sherry-style sports journalist from many, many years ago on Radio New Zealand, appeared rather ironically, but without a personal sense of irony, as an expert witness on journalistic ethics in the case, and then would appear to have told his old colleague, Fellow Sullivan, the head of TVNZ News, during the break, that he shouldn't have done that and that Batchelor was a complete nutter, which prompted Phil to announce that to the court moments later, probably, one hopes, blowing a hole in the case. But I think what I wanted to say to our readers about this is I very much hope TVNZ wins both cases, but these tactics of taking defamation cases both against the source, in this case, Sanjana Hatatua, the reporter, and the organisation is a way of shutting people down, and it's expensive and it's really hard. So when people crap all over the mainstream media, this is what they're trying to do.
And it's good to see TVNZ has won the case against Tallies. And if we get Mr. Batchelor in court...
I think he's probably the Reverend or the Pastor Batchelor, yeah.
Yes, court on a stand, saying that he thinks that a certain race of people are different from others and also cannot claim tangata whenua status. That would be an interesting court case. Yeah,
it would be. Well, it's going to happen. That's what we're going through. Now, just before we actually completely reveal to the audience the layout of today, we're going to have shortly Dr. Catherine Dyer, and there she is, on the year in climate change and what might happen next year, and more on our soft reneging. We're going to slightly extend the international section today. We have Professor Patman as usual, but we also have somebody I know quite well, or a little bit, Lee Feinstein, who is a former US ambassador to Poland and a very experienced expert in international affairs. And we'll put them together in a bit of a mind meld with Professor Patman. And then I've invited on a woman called Philippa Yazbek, who heads two organisations relevant to what happened in Bondi this week and how we might think about it in New Zealand. One is that she's a leader at Gun Control New Zealand, but she's also leading an organisation called Doyen, which is New Zealand Jews Against Occupation. And I think she has an interesting perspective. And then we're going to close the show, Bernard, with our forecast. We're going to ask everybody if we have time their book or podcast or recommendation, the biggest event of the year, but we'll have to sort of zoom it along a little bit. And we're also going to reveal Simon, our Stig. Was it you that called him Stig last week?
No, that was me, and I so hope that he'll be wearing a helmet.
Yeah. Well, he's got a crash helmet, as we both know. That's a very good. I don't know whether he's brought it, but yeah. Simon is our Stig. So, and if anybody doesn't know that, it's Jeremy Clarkson's guy in the crash helmet, who was actually quite a famous touring car racing driver from time to time. So, Dr. Dyer, please come on and tell us just how shitty the situation is.
Well, how much change has happened, not just in our policies, but in the climate and what we might expect for next year?
Yeah, well, I mean, this year within the New Zealand situation, it's been the year of the slow renege and the year of policy incoherency. So, lots of changes in terms of pulling parts of the architecture down and then having unexpected things happen that may not have been exactly what they were planning on. But yeah, in the broader scheme of things, I think next year is going to be a year where energy comes quite to the forefront. I think there's lots of brewing issues both here and internationally around the energy cost of energy, and for all sorts of kind of contributing reasons. But overall, the cost of energy is growing everywhere, and so that has big implications for how economies function and what can and can't happen. And also, I think the resources wars over critical minerals and other resources that's becoming more and more apparent, and that feeds into kind of overshoot and climate change issues as well. And I think, yeah, what people are prepared to sacrifice for power in all of those areas, and the kind of narratives that uphold that. Like, I'm finding that confusing, but also really interesting. Like, there are so many narratives that can be really hard to work out exactly what it is that they're trying to protect or uphold.
Catherine, could you just what do you mean by that? For example, the Luxon remark that only an idiot doesn't believe in climate change anymore, but then not behaving accordingly. What is that? What you mean?
Yeah, things like that, but also narratives about progress, so and that comes into stuff about, GDP growth and AI development and all of those sort of things. Like, what do we mean by progress, and whose interests is it serving, and what are the narratives around that promote certain points of view and exclude others, so that sort of thing. But yes, what Luxon saying only an idiot doesn't, I mean, I think that's probably true, but then the narratives around climate change are shifting to account for that. So instead of outright denial, which we still get a lot of in some places, but you're also getting more and more discourses of delay, so anything that can delay change happens. And particularly in the US, you're actually getting these efforts to kill the information sources, so we don't know what's coming at us. So just this week at the moment, they're talking about closing down the National Center for Atmospheric Research.
This is in the
Colorado.
United States.
Yep, in Boulder, Colorado. One of the globally leading institutes for meteorologists and for understanding anything about the atmosphere. So it's weather forecasting as well as climate change work, and behind the effort behind this, the move to shut that down is all these political shenanigans as well about Trump's particular issues with the governor of that state, and apparently it dates all the way back to somebody who allowed Trump supporters access to those voting machines after the 2020 election and then got done afterwards for corruption. And Trump has since pardoned her, but the state of Colorado has said, well, you can't pardon somebody for
someone
a state
prosecuted
crime,
for state crimes.
Yeah, so now that is all tied up into this shutting down of the National Centre for Atmospheric Research. But you shut down organisations like that, and that is that's literally trying to blind people to things that are life-threatening in the future, and so it's there's narratives of trying to hide things as well as reveal things, so I think next year's that's just heating up more and more. It's getting,
Catherine, do you sense this year that scientists, those working in the policy establishment around climate, are becoming more activist, more warlike, if you like? That's a strange thing to say, but more willing to say, you know what, I've just got to come out and say something here. Otherwise, the tools that I use, the stories that we tell each other are going to be wiped out by the forces of, anti-climate action evil.
Yeah, I mean, in particular quarters, there's definitely a little more of a sense of we have to start standing for something and defending our corner here. So there is a bit more of that, a little bit more, leaving behind that kind of scientific conservatism about what, about not getting involved in those things on the public stage. So, I think that, we saw that national emergency briefing in the UK over the last couple of weeks, which is, like a standing up of experts to really kind of say, hey, we don't think people necessarily get how urgent and important these things are and what the consequences are, and so we're going to put on a big, show to talk about it. There's definitely action on that front, including the own group that I'm a part of that's looking at the reality of everything.
The reality of everything. I like that.
Reality of everything.
I had a meeting yesterday at a new think tank in Auckland called the Complex Conversations Unit, which I rather like. So I think the reality of everything is really good. Now, Catherine, in order to keep to the tempo today, particularly because of having Lee on from Washington at very late at night, what are your recommendations of a book, podcast, movie, or all three?
So trying to stay on topic, I recommend a podcast called Overshoot. And it's done by a guy called Laurie Layburn, and within that, it's about 5 episodes, so it's not a particularly long, it's a new podcast, it's not particularly long series at the moment, but he talks about things like Minsky moments and derailment. So some really, really interesting topics and very well kind of encapsulated in each episode. So I think people would really enjoy that. It's talking about what is the world beyond 1.5 degrees? What are the things we're looking at now?
And it's not that far away. It seems like this year or maybe next year is when the official day or year of 1.5 happens. And now we're looking at what do we get by 2030 or 2050? Is it going to be 2 degrees or 3 degrees? And what does that mean?
Yeah, and also when you think about the official pronouncement of 1.5 degrees, it has to have been around for long enough for them to say it's official now, which means, we're already basically looking at, at a 1.5 degree world now, and we're starting to get the sense that it's an era of consequences. But I think the idea that those are just going to grow and aggregate and keep coming at us harder and faster and harder and faster and harder and faster, like on and on now. It's that idea of, well, this is the coolest summer you're ever going to have,
And Catherine, are there any other recommendations? Books, movies?
Do
Do not say Frozen.
I particularly enjoyed The Diplomat this year on Netflix. Yep.
I think it's also the anniversary of Heat, so we've got Heat and Frozen for you. So, Catherine, thank you very much for everything. I mean, Bernard is the head of this, of course, but may I say thank you very much for everything you've done this year. People love you, and we need to have a conversation about how we format you best. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Catherine. Bye-bye.
Now, let me introduce a regular and an irregular. Professor Lee Feinstein is most importantly for the regular viewers the husband of Elaine Monahan, who, as you know, comes on sometimes from Washington, not nearly often enough. Our audience loves her. But the last time I saw Lee in person, he was the ambassador to Poland, to Warsaw for the United States in the Obama era. And Lee is also the head of the Hamilton Lugar Institute of International Affairs. Is it, Lee?
Close enough.
at Indiana University, Bloomington. And he's also had a long history on the board and on various committees of the American Holocaust Museum, and is a really interesting international expert, particularly with that kind of democratic background, a Democratic Party background, for which I think he's now paying a little bit of a price, but he'll explain that perhaps. And of course we have Professor Robert Patman, our regular go-to guy from Otago on all things international. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming across. Robert, for being here always.
Thank you.
It's just marvellous. And Lee, thank you for stepping in. And I think you're in DC now, right?
I am. I'm always happy to sub for Elaine.
Thank you. We did quite a lot with Robert last week on the national security strategy, which alarmed Robert, alarmed us all in a sense, partly because it ignored what our traditional risks identified, and identified Europe as the risk, mass immigration as the risk, and also had this seemingly weird thing about interfering in European politics. As a former ambassador and as a State Department person, what did you make of it?
Well, it's definitely different.
You do not have to be a diplomat on this show. Lee. You can use the F word.
I don't have any alcohol as you two do, but next time I'll be prepared properly to do that. I would say, first thing I would say is that, it's completely understandable and accurate why there would be these kinds of responses in Europe, because it seems in many places to be completely at odds with what U.S. policy has been towards Europe for 80 years. So in that sense, I can understand the alarm and agree with a lot of it. I would also just say that, I wouldn't overstate the importance of these kinds of documents in terms of how they impact policy. They have an impact on policy because they are read by other people and they have reactions to it. So in that sense, of course, it's a serious impact. But I would say a lot of this is written for internal, domestic, political consumption for a small group of people who were kind of directing and the architects of sort of a theoretical Trump foreign policy. So I would just try to put it into that context. And those of you who remember the remarks of the vice president at the Munich Security Council last February will look at this report and they'll see a lot that's very familiar, which is a sort of criticism from outside Europe about a democracy deficit in Europe. Now, of course, there is a democracy deficit, and there are concerns that people have in Europe about the sort of the space between the European Commission and, sort of a bureaucratic state. Those are legitimate criticisms which are felt widely in Europe, I would say across, political and ideological perspectives. But this is really an assault on a particular point of view, which would be, maybe for the purpose of this conversation, the liberal internationalist view, as opposed to a nationalist view. And that, I think, was very alarming, but really, I think, harkens back to sort of the beginning of the administration. And the document itself, the other thing about it that's curious is it's inconsistent. And to some degrees, it has the feeling of being written by a committee where somebody came in, or maybe late at night, and they inserted a paragraph that actually reaffirmed the importance of Europe to U.S. security, the centrality of peace in Ukraine to the United States. So, and that, I would say, last thing I'll say is, and this is that there's growing pressure, even within the president's party, against these kinds of approaches towards U.S. relations with Europe. And so I think some of this language that was introduced into the document, which seems completely at odds with the tone in other places, is an acknowledgement of the fact that this view is coming under criticism, even within the president's political party.
Before I bring Robert in to expand us slightly into the whole area that Robert's kind of an expert, certainly on our show, about the international rules-based system. As the former ambassador to Poland, I recall the time when you were there, which was, I recall, the Obama period. You must have worked incredibly closely with the Warsaw government to increase its defense spending, to bind it into NATO. I think they were already in NATO when you were there, or did they join NATO when you were there? How do you feel about this kind of rejection, in a way, of the course that Poland has been on in the time that you were ambassador and since?
So I was involved in the negotiation with Poland to establish the first, what we then called, continuous presence of U.S. troops in the country. And that was a successful negotiation. And unfortunately, the need for it has become apparent. And now there are 10,000 plus troops, U.S. troops, in Poland. I mean, Poland has been, I like to say, with South Africa, but in different ways, the most successful post-transition society in the third wave of democracies. It's really remarkable. And in Poland's case, it's also accompanied by, economic growth and in every kind of measure. So it's really remarkable. And the Poles, who now are visiting the United States at all different kinds of delegations from across their political spectrum, they're trying to decode what exactly is happening in the United States. Because, they would be, and in some parts of their government they are, aligned ideologically with the Vance point of view that I was referring to before. And yet they are reading this document, which sort of calls into question U.S.'s commitment to Ukraine. And so they're trying to understand themselves what's happening and how they can align and how they can preserve an American presence of forces in the country and a commitment to Ukraine's security as well.
I wanted to ask Lee and Robert, actually, a question about the reaction to this security strategy. Some comments this week from Mark Rutte from NATO, essentially saying, and this for me was remarkable quote for someone who has a bit of an obsession for history about World War II and World War I for that matter. Rutte saying, Russia has brought war back to Europe and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. Lee, what did you make of those comments and whether it suggests Europe is really, really, really worried that they're going to be on their own against Russia?
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I read that speech and listened to it as well, and I was, holy cow. So what I think is happening is, however, that there's a kind of a disjunction between, I would say, European leaders about the seriousness of the situation, which the Polish foreign minister and president have both, and they're from different parties, have both called, they've said Poland is in a pre-war situation. I mean, this is alarming. I think what Rutte was trying to do, though, was sort of send a wake-up call for Europe, because there is a kind of, it's not clear the extent to which, the average person in Europe feels the urgency in the same way.
Robert, your thoughts on that that's a remarkable speech from Mark Rutte.
First of all, hello, Lee. It's good to be speaking with you. I think there's a domestic dimension as well, if I may say so. Mark Rutte went out on a limb to some degree in what has been described as daddy diplomacy, excessive flattery and praise of Mr. Trump, describing him as a genius and all that sort of thing. I think that was accepted within NATO ranks amongst the Europeans, providing it delivered. But the national security strategy document, and I take on board what Lee's saying about, the document probably has more domestic significance than international. But I think there was a feeling, Lee, that amongst the Europeans and amongst the Anglosphere countries, if you want to put it that way, that if you're nice to Mr. Trump, you don't react to some of his provocations, you'll be able to sort of entice him or nudge him in the right direction. What the national security strategy did was confirm that strategy, daddy diplomacy, has failed. It lays, I do take your point about the domestic politics of the national security strategy, but at the same time, that document does align with some of the broad contours that the administration has followed. Mr. Trump has been very pro-Putin from the outset. He's consistently settled, both in April and more recently, peace deals which were largely on Putin's terms, and treat Ukraine and Russia as sort of moral equivalents, whereas one country has invaded the other. And so I think, in a sense, when Rutte made that tough speech, I think to some degree he was signalling to other Europeans, look, I get it. Russia is a real threat. And the other thing is, it's no secret that many Europeans are very worried about Mr. Putin's beneath the radar activities in Europe, supporting ADF. That's been going on since 2015. The interference in the Brexit referendum, which the Brits don't like to talk about, but it happened. And Mr. Putin, of course, says that he's no threat to Europe, but he said he would never invade Ukraine. So, in a sense, there's always, a bit of a difference between declaratory policy and real policy. And I think Rutte's hard-hitting speech was an attempt to say to the Europeans that he has no illusions about the Russian threat, and that his praise of Mr. Trump was tactical, was designed to achieve an end. It hasn't achieved that end, and that doesn't mean that he shares the Trump administration's somewhat rose-tinted view of Mr. Putin's role in the world.
But both of you, if I may, Lee and Robert, we talk a lot, particularly when Robert is on, Lee, about the international rules-based order, and one of Robert's regular pitches and explanations is that small countries like New Zealand need or depend on the rules-based order. Maybe you could start, and then we'll flip to Robert, about the state of that rules-based order. And I know it's a stretch for you to think about tiny weeny New Zealand down here, but what is the state of that rules-based order, and do you think it will come back in a post-Trump era?
Well, first of all, not a stretch, but of course, great respect for Helen Clark, who I had the privilege of working with a little bit when I was with Madeleine Albright. And if I just may, for a moment, to Robert's point, Robert, I completely agree about the internal politics of Rutte's remarks. I think it's a great point, 100%. The speech itself, when it talks specifically about Trump, is still daddy diplomacy. But yes, but on the other hand, the way Trump has dealt in this very pragmatic way with von der Leyen, the European president, who was then initially sort of ignored by him, but then became a negotiating partner, subjecting her also to a lot of criticism at home as well. So I guess, consistency hasn't been a strong feature of this U.S. administration. So I agree with you. And I agree with the motivations that Rutte had exactly. But on the other hand, from Trump's point of view, he just doesn't. Those are not necessarily high values.
But will they
him.
come back when he's gone, Lee? Will they come back, or is this a shedding moment when we adopt a might is right approach?
Well, that's a good bridging question. I mean, to merge the two questions. I mean, I mean, I tend look. This isn't the first time that there has been a transatlantic breach. There was a very strong transatlantic breach on Iraq as well, going further back on intermediate range nuclear missiles. And those of course reached New Zealand as well. So somehow how is the U.S. viewed? It's a bit of a cardiogram. It depends who's in office and what they're doing. So if you want to track it, but I think that this is different and really worrisome. And I guess I would say, I have my sort of what was the most significant event of 2025, so I'll save it. But it's very related to this point and how the United States has put itself in a radically different position with respect to Ukraine and Europe, and it's really quite significant. I was at a really terrific briefing that David Miliband did yesterday. He has this annual report, and
David is the head of the International Crisis Group and former British Foreign Minister, right?
Yeah, the IRC, the International Rescue Group. That's right. And
so he's a Thunderbird, basically. You won't know what a Thunderbird is, but yeah, he's the head of the Thunderbirds.
I'll nod my head in agreement and quickly look at my phone. But he does this report that focuses on the 20 countries at greatest risk of new or worsening humanitarian emergencies each year. And what he does, I think, which is, he bridges his background as a diplomat with his background now working on humanitarian relief, and sort of makes the connection. And so his report is called The New World Disorder. And basically he makes the connection between the fact that the breakdown of, the sort of rules-based order, which of course was never perfect and often observed in the breach, but just even the idea that these don't matter, the dysfunction of the UN Security Council, sort of disregard for the concept of international humanitarian law. All of these things are at the heart of the conflicts that he's identifying, and the countries most at risk. You can't sort of, separate these things. So yes, this is extremely serious, and yes, I like to think we can come back from these things, and I still remain sort of optimistic, but I also recognize that this is a breach, and it gets harder every time.
Robert, we've accidentally squeezed you as we have occasion. Please, how would you like to address this question of the state of the international rules-based order? People are picking up very strong on the consistency hasn't been a feature of the Trump administration, but
yeah, but I think it goes beyond Trump, and I think Lee would hopefully agree with me that the United States has sometimes been a bit of an outlier when it comes to consistency about following the rules, and that's probably a function of its power and also its sense of exceptionalism. And given that America is the most powerful country in the world, it sometimes held others to standards which it doesn't always hold itself. And I think many people believe all will be fine when Mr. Trump departs from the scene, but Mr. Trump, in a sense, is a function of the changing political context of the United States. And so I think it would be great if the United States had a rethink, saw the advantages of getting rid of the veto or constraining it, because at the moment, matters of war and peace rest on just the shoulders of 5 countries. And that's unacceptable to the rest because they put up with the consequences. I take the view, I'd love the United States, after all, the United States, and to a lesser extent the UK, as well as a number of smaller countries like New Zealand, played a key role in establishing the architecture of the rules-based order after the Second World War. And I'd love the United States, and I think it was John F. Kennedy's vision in the 60s, to try to sort of give it fresh energy. But that would mean the US leading through institutions rather than outside them. And I'm not sure that's possible at the moment or for the foreseeable future. Does that mean the rules-based order is over if the United States doesn't lead it? No, I don't think so. I think we're going to see the rise of the rest in the 21st century. And I think for most countries in the global south, but also the other liberal democracies, rules are important. And for small and middle powers, they really do add predictability in terms of commerce and in terms of diplomatic exchanges. And I think that the logic of cooperation will override geopolitical tensions. Ultimately, it's going to be a very difficult transition.
So we can't just pull up our head over the duvet.
Because the biggest problems that we all face can only be solved by cooperation. I know Mr. Trump can pretend climate change is a hoax, but another president in the future is going to have to face up to the reality it's not. Yeah. And so how can you solve problems that don't respect borders? You have to have self-interested international cooperation. So I'm actually, in the long run, believing that, as somebody once said about something else, the international rules-based system is the worst in the world apart from all the others. And certainly it's the only one that offers any realistic prospect of dealing with transnational terrorism, pandemics, in these problems that are too big for even superpowers to solve on their own. So, yeah, it's going to be a very difficult transition. As I said before, it'd be great if the United States had a rethink and decided that its leadership would best safeguarded through working through a rules-based system rather than being a little bit on the outside looking in. But that's for the United States to decide.
Robert, thank you. Hang on there for a minute, because we've got our next guest sort of hanging by her fingernails in the green room. I'm going to ask you to do this reasonably quickly, please. Lee, you said something about the biggest event of 2025, and I think I asked you for a recommendation as well, please.
Yeah. So I would say, just going back to Ukraine, that the decision of the Trump administration to withdraw its active support to Ukraine and adopt a mediator's role for ending a conflict with Ukraine is the most memorable or important event of the last year, because it challenges the very nature of the Atlantic Alliance as a central pillar of the post-World War II world.
Great. And any recommendation on a book, a podcast, or a movie?
I'll just talk about a movie I just saw, and just keeping with the Poland theme, if I may. It's by Agnieszka Holland, who's a terrific director, legendary in Poland, protege of Andrzej Wajda, has done some TV shows as well. And it's about Franz Kafka, and it's called Franz. I don't know if it's open yet.
Yeah,
You've seen it? Okay, well done.
No, I haven't seen it. I've seen it. Now, Lee, thank you so much. Stay on for a minute to hear Robert's, but can we also give our love through you to Elaine? She is a much-loved veteran of the Hoon, and the audience loves her. Robert, your anchor points or recommendations?
Well, I find it difficult to disagree with Lee about that being one of the most significant events. Another significant event, which is not getting the headlines, apart from some frantic exchanges on the internet, it concerns an interstellar visitor, Atlas 3I. And I understand it's its closest encounter with Earth on the 19th of December, very close now. And people like Harvey Loeb, Professor Harvey Loeb, says it is possible we may have a technological signature. Now, let's wait and see, but it potentially is a significant development. The discovery of non-human intelligence, which has been predicted by insiders at NASA and others for over a decade, if that did eventuate by the end of the year, then that would be very significant indeed. But geopolitically, I agree with Lee. I think that was a really significant development in terms of geopolitics, and I think Atlas 3I could tell us a little bit about our future going forward in 2026.
Right, beam me up, Robert. Thank you so much. Robert, Lee, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
And Philippa, terribly
Thank
sorry
you.
to keep you waiting. I hope you heard those clever chaps in the green room. Can you speak? Are you hearing us?
I did. Nice
tickety boo. Is everything tickety boo? Two. I can do my spinal tap.
Everything's all good. Thank you.
In honor of Bob Reiner. Now, I wanted to introduce you. I found you a very intriguing person who I've only encountered this week, but you're the spokesman for two really interesting groups. One is Gun Control New Zealand, and the other is a group called Daon, Jews Against Occupation. And I found those two a really interesting combination given what happened in Bondi, which I think seems for a lot of New Zealanders terribly close and terribly not hard to get your head around, but that it remains, no matter how strident and strong, a very complicated story, and you hold much of that complication in those two roles that you have. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, maybe from one role to another, how you see what happened in Bondi this week and what the relevance is to New Zealand, please?
Sure. I actually got into the gun control activism because I'm Jewish. The Christchurch terror attack could just as easily have happened to the New Zealand Jewish community. I also think it's really important that we combat hate through solidarity with other groups, and didn't think it was solely up to the Muslim community to be fighting the good fight on gun laws in New Zealand. The attack in Bondi has kind of hit hard. New Zealand and the New Zealand Jewish community is very closely connected to the Australian community. A lot of infrastructure is actually in Australia, and many of us knew people who were there, or friends of friends were there, and so it was quite a traumatic and shocking thing. I think also traumatic and shocking because of the various changes that Australia has made to their gun laws over the year. And we were all very surprised to see another mass shooting there.
So on a gun law front, if I could just address with that first, if you wouldn't mind, because we saw that, and I do also, before we do the gun law one, you said that I think that the mosque killings were a catalyst for you to really think about this. Does that mean that you did read the Jacinda Ardern remark that they are us as sort of genuine and truly reflective of any minority could be in this position? I think it was interesting that you said it could easily have been a Jewish minority that was attacked that day as well. Not necessarily by the same
not necessarily,
person, but
there's sort of different flavors of right-wing extremism, but it absolutely could have been a Jewish community. In fact, there was a right-wing extremist who shot up a synagogue in Pittsburgh just probably within 6 months before the Christchurch terror attack. So yes, I think it is something that could happen to any minority community, particularly those targeted by certain groups, and we live with a similar sense of vulnerability. The Muslim and the Jewish communities, there's a lot that unites us, and I do think that Jacinda expressed something about how people feel and see the place of various ethnic communities in New Zealand. Obviously, unfortunately, doesn't reflect everybody's view of the world, but I think the majority of New Zealanders certainly don't discriminate between different kinds of Kiwis.
It was interesting that, and I've heard you speak about this elsewhere, that Benjamin Netanyahu made a very strongly worded attack on both Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, directly, but also on Australian policy, particularly about recognising a putative Palestinian state, but also the reluctance of the New South Wales government and the Australian government to adopt a stronger stance or a more rigid stance about defining anti-Semitism. What's your view of that?
I think Netanyahu has been grossly irresponsible. He continually conflates all Jews with the state of Israel. He kind of, in a way, stokes hatred of Jews outside of Israel with the hope that Jews will migrate to Israel. He also has, sort of talks frequently about Jewish safety, and his positions are quite extreme. While of course the people who commit terrorist attacks are responsible for them, he certainly is creating a climate where there is more hatred of Jews by undertaking a genocide in the name of Jewish people. So I don't think he's kind of lowering the temperature in any way. There's also a very strong campaign in some parts of the Jewish community to conflate anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel. We've seen that, with the anti-Semitism commissioner in Australia. She's been incredibly critical of pro-Palestinian protests. But, for example, there were neo-Nazis marching in front of the New South Wales Parliament, and she didn't even put out a statement condemning them. So there's only a double standard at work there.
Philippa, before Bernard asks you about, and we have squeezed your time today, I apologise for that, but before Bernard asks you about the gun aspect of this, both I suspect for Australia and New Zealand, how does one, having heard everything you've said, why should kids going to Kadima have to have armed guards? Why should they be afraid going to Kadima school? Why should Jewish synagogues feel the need to have security if the state is protecting them as much as it's protecting other groups?
Well, I mean, I think having armed guards is essentially a higher level of security. I think it's incredibly sad that communities feel vulnerable and unsafe and need armed guards. I think that's tragic, but I think it is the state's responsibility to ensure that all communities are safe, and hopefully the government will be increasing funding for community safety again. They unfortunately had cut the Safer Communities Fund that was put in place after the terror attacks. But the way we create safety is by building solidarity and by engaging in anti-racism work and focusing on the rights of everybody, ensuring that all minorities have the rights to speech and freedom of worship.
That must be quite.
Things.
Is that sometimes quite hard for you? We had a little chat about this before you came today, but is that sometimes quite hard for you to stand up in the broader elements of your own community? I mean, yeah. I know you're a New Zealander as well, and in the biggest community, but within the Jewish community, that must be quite difficult sometimes for you, isn't it?
The situation in Gaza has completely divided the Jewish community. It's the biggest rift. Other communities argue over different things. The Jews at the moment are entirely arguing over the issue of Palestine, and you see this in the US where 70% of Jewish people under the age of 40 voted for Mamdani, whereas the kind of community elders were condemning him as anti-Semitic, even though there was zero anti-Semitic statements that he's ever made. And it has become a big rift between those who sort of wish to focus only on anti-Semitism and those who are looking more and have a more universal view of human rights.
Philippa, thank you. Bernard wants to ask you about gun laws. Bernard, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Philippa, I have a particular interest in this area of gun laws and the role and nature of automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons and high-powered rifles, because in the early 1990s, we lived in Australia, in Canberra. I was working in the press gallery in Canberra on the day of the Port Arthur massacre, and had only just come back from Port Arthur, where myself and my family and the lovely Lynn and our wonderful daughter had been at that cafe where the horrible mass shooting had happened. And then I'd watched up close and personal as John Howard pushed through massively tighter gun laws in a very similar way to the way that Jacinda Ardern pushed through massively tighter gun laws after the 2019 Christchurch attacks. And I was also in the press gallery in Wellington to watch that as well. And for me, it was obviously shocking to see the Bondi killings, but I couldn't understand it. How had this happened after such a very strong crackdown on these weapons, which made me a bit nervous about New Zealand? 6 years after Christchurch, do we risk having the same watering down of our rules or our laws that could allow something similar again?
Yeah, well, luckily for Australia, the semi-automatic guns are banned, and they weren't using them. The death toll would have been unfortunately much, much, much higher if they had access to those types of firearms. I think there's still a whole lot of information still to come out, but in Australia and most other places, gun laws generally are only changed substantively in response to mass shootings. And I think the trouble in Australia was that the National Firearms Accord was never quite fully implemented, and it also is quite sort of ossified and stuck, and it wasn't really updated to take account of new threats. They've got their state-federal split, which hasn't helped with things like their firearms registries, as well as the security screening from the Australian intelligence services. So some of those we're better off on. We certainly have sharing of information between police and the intelligence services, so touch wood, I hope that in that similar scenario in New Zealand, if someone had come to the attention of the security services, they or someone they lived with would not have a firearm. But we do face the same kinds of risks. So, we have there are no limits for people with ordinary firearms licenses on the number of firearms that they can own in New Zealand. Some states in Australia already have limits, so Western Australia has brought in limits. It looks like the other states will follow suit on that. So we are concerned. I mean, we've certainly dramatically reduced the risks by getting rid of semi-automatic firearms. But these kinds of attacks, particularly if there's more than one shooter, there's still very strong risks in New Zealand, and it's partly about looking at the firearms laws, and it's partly also about trying to ensure you're not having people radicalized locally.
I understand that the new government, not so new now, nearly 2 years, has addressed the gun laws. How much of a risk is that they're going to be watered down, or has there been a rearguard action to stop the new minister from changing things too much?
So the new bill represents more or less a rewrite of the existing laws. There is not much change. There's a lot of technical change and exemptions. There's certainly a few things that we will be submitting on. It's currently with select committee. So, for example, people who do pest control and have semi-automatic firearms are going to put them on a 5-year vetting cycle rather than current 2.5 years. We certainly think that 2.5 years is far more appropriate for people with access to those kinds of firearms. And there are, some safety improvements that Nicole McKee herself put forward, such as restrictions on pistol magazines. But we're still working through our submission on that, and we will be sharing that and running a campaign to try and encourage people to submit to the select committee. We think also there's an opportunity for the government to perhaps, go further than what they'd previously considered. We were invited to join the Firearms Accord in Australia in 1996. And the New Zealand government declined. John Banks talks about the missed opportunity after Aramoana to get rid of semi-automatic firearms. Our history is one of missed opportunities here, and hopefully we don't miss this one.
Philippa, thank you so much. You're so thoughtful. The audience has already, even the YouTube audience has really appreciated this. I primed you because you're not a regular, but that we do this in our last episode of the year. What is your recommendation for a movie, book, or podcast, please?
Well, I'm going to take up the time and go with all three. Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza by Peter Beinart, on the topic of Palestine and Israel. He's a Jewish author who used to be very supportive of the Israeli state and has now decided that it is not ethically compatible with Judaism. For my podcast, I'm going to go with Articles of Interest, which is a spin-off from 99% Invisible, which talks about the role of clothing in society and why we have certain styles and trends. And the film is called Before We Forget. It's a sort of queer coming-of-age story, but it happens to be made by a former schoolmate of mine. We were both incredibly fortunate to get a scholarship to study at United World College in Italy, which was a sort of very hopeful project set up in the Cold War to grow international understanding by bringing together a few hundred students from different countries.
And just say that one again.
The film is called Before We Forget.
Thank you. Philippa, thank you so much. We're going to get Simon's now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody thinks has been so thrilled to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, shall we get Stig in, otherwise known as poor old Simon?
Absolutely.
Simon, where are you?
Come on in.
Yeah. There
Simon,
you go.
lovely
You're
to
not
see
wearing
you.
your crash helmet.
No. It's great to see you, Simon. For those who don't know, and who experience the podcast through the recorded version, the recorded audio version, you may be surprised when you occasionally stumble into the live Hoon to hear that on occasion it can be a little raw and authentic. But it's even better. It's still authentic and so well produced by Simon, who has done a wonderful job. Simon, thank you very much, and it's lovely to see your face and to say hello to the wider Hoon audience live.
So, Simon, you are our Stig, right?
You could say, I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now,
Ask me a simple question.
I asked you to give your Person of the Year, book, podcast, and movie. Off you go.
Okay, so this is going to be a little bit serious, but I had the pleasure of working with a guy called Paul Oxborough earlier this year. I made a podcast episode with him, and he is the chair of the UK charity Mental Health Motorbike. And
yes, yep.
He's a lovely guy, and over 6 weeks I got to know him quite well, and we put together an amazing episode. And I just thought I'd go with something a little bit close to home and say
brilliant.
Paul was my
and so that's a podcast, or is it a book?
Well, actually, that's I consider him my Person of the Year, even though no one.
Interesting.
Outside.
Okay, your personal Person of the Year, like that.
But we will include the link to the podcast in the show notes today. Tomorrow.
We could do that. Yes.
And is there a book, podcast, or movie, Simon?
Well, yes. So I'm reading a book at the moment.
Have you not got a clock ticking there?
But hey,
get on with it.
I'm the one who has to edit this. Believe
Exactly.
me, I want to get this finished as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but we know you only edit me out, which is
This is
Well, just your bad dad jokes, yeah. Okay, so what I'm reading, or what I would recommend, is a book called Broken Republic, The Inside Story of Germany's Descent into Chaos. It's written by a couple of guys, Chris Reiter and Will Wilkes. It's if you've lived in Germany for a while, which I have, and you start to understand a little bit about Germany, then it's a really interesting read. Podcast, I have to say I really enjoyed Juggernaut 1, and I've thoroughly enjoyed Juggernaut 2 because I was working at Radio New Zealand sort of as National came into power, and then I was at university studying politics when the whole MMP debate was going on, and so that was very relevant for me at the time. I don't have a film, but a couple of TV shows that I want to shout out, both quite recent.
quickly.
Okay. Pluribus was brilliant.
Oh, yes,
But tied
yes.
equally Task, the HBO series, which has been brilliant as well. So that's it. Can I go now?
Brilliant.
Thank you very much,
Simon. No, you may
Lovely
not.
to see you and hear.
Simon is joining us from Bonn. I'm incredible, and he drives a BMW motorcycle and does many motorcycle podcasts. Bernard, your Person of the Year, however you're going to do this, podcasts, movies.
Yeah, Helen Robinson was my Person of the Year. The podcast of the year is one I haven't heard yet, but I'm sure is going to be brilliant, and that's Juggernaut 2. I agree with Simon. It is one of the essentials, and of course I'm connected in a way with the spin-off, and I'm a huge admirer of Toby Manhire, and it has built a reputation in this country now, Juggernaut, that the finance minister, Nicola Willis, this week suggested that Toby Manhire be the moderator for a debate between Nicola Willis and Ruth Richardson, simply because of his role in reporting on that essential time. So Juggernaut 2, even though I haven't listened to it. My movie of the year is the movie Prime Minister, which was the movie
Controversial.
put together by Clark Gayford and HBO, from footage he shot mostly of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern before, during and after the COVID crisis and her subsequent resignation. I found it moving. I found it incredibly frustrating and sometimes depressing. It made me more sympathetic and admiring of not just Jacinda Ardern, but Clark Gayford and Neve and all of those around her. I'm featured in the movie. I ask a question in the movie.
Not now, Bernard, I think.
And it was one of the saddest moments of this year to watch the beginning of the movie, which is Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern putting Neve onto a yellow American school bus to go to a school in Boston, because she's obviously there studying at Harvard and is bringing up her family there. And we, of course, hope that she and her family are able to come back and want to come back at some point. But she wouldn't say this, and but she is in exile, and it's one of the great tragedies of the last decade, I think, in New Zealand political life. So that's the movie that I'd watch, and the TV series, which I am most.
I'm going to come through. I'm going to come through to that room and give you a little clip around the ear to hurry up. But yeah,
that I'm most enjoying at the moment is The Hack, which is the series featuring David Tennant and Robert Carlyle of the case of the hacking of phones, and documented by The Guardian journalist Nick Davies.
I have no idea when you find the time to do this. Shall I do you now? You say, Peter, what were yours for the year? Is that right?
Peter, what were your movie, podcast, and TV series of the year?
Okay, so I've changed my book recommendation, and it is now one that I've mentioned briefly on the show. It's from 2013, and it's called Anti-Judaism, The History of a Way of Thinking by David Nirenberg. And it is a tome, but it gets to the heart of why anti-Semitism is so pervasive in our culture and has been for so long, and you won't think about it another way. It's even worth, just find a review of Anti-Judaism, The History of a Way of Thinking by David Nirenberg in The Guardian or The Times or something, and you'll see what I mean, I think. Movie, Secret... well, actually, I'm going to two because you did bloody 63. One Battle After Another, which is this year's movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's based on a book by Vineland by Thomas Pynchon, which many of you will have read, and it gives you a sense of what Antifa might be if it really existed. And another one would be The Secret Agent, or El Agente Secreto, which is about a wonderful Argentinian film about the military control period. Person of the Year, David Seymour, for triggering what might be an unstoppable wave of anti-treaty thinking that I suspect he is going to double down on, triple down on, and double down on in 2026, and I believe will become central to the next election in a very destructive way. But I could be completely wrong. So thank you, everybody. We're not going to do a skateboarding dog today. We do appreciate all of you out there. I'm not going to do what... Oh, let me just do one thing, Bernard. David Moring, who I admire immensely when he comes on, has noted that Peter Arnett died today at 91. Now, Peter came from Invercargill, was, I think, on the Otago Daily Times, and became a very important and significant CNN journalist, most recently in a sense. I covered the South African elections with him, but prior to that, he was the one American journalist who stayed behind in Baghdad and got incredible shit for doing so. He's an incredibly brave. He was an incredibly brave, courageous journalist. Naturally had a fairly gigantic ego as well. I once said to him that I had one of the rare unsigned copies of his book, which he took with great humour. But he was a great chap, and he's a big loss. And he's a great New Zealander. But thank you very much, everybody. We do appreciate it, and we appreciate Simon. And I appreciate you, Bernard. And I'll come and make you another G&T if you like. People are asking if you've got pissed. I've only made you one, so far as I know.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the G&T. Thank you very much, Simon, for coming onto the show. Thank you very much, everyone, for another amazing year on the Kaka. This has been the Hoon for 2025. I am Bernard Hickey with co-host Peter Bale. Ka kite anō. Have a great, safe Christmas and summer.
Yeah, try editing that one, Simon.
Ngā mihi nui.